Now the 2022 Formula 1 season has come to an end, it's time we set ourselves up for an online pasting and rank the 20 full-time drivers from worst to best. Our F1 team closely followed the progress of every driver this year, including substitutes Nico Hulkenberg and Nick de Vries when they appeared, but we're only ranking the main drivers this time. Our ranking is not about the best drivers based on their overall ability, but specifically on their performance level relative to the available machinery over the course of the 2022 season. This takes into consideration myriad factors like pace in qualifying in the race, consistency, rate of mistakes, how they progressed through the year, and many more. Review content like this might mean the 2022 season is finally over, but there's still plenty of stories to tell. So make sure you comment, like and subscribe, and turn on the notifications bell so you don't miss anything from the race over the winter. 20. Nicholas Latifi. There were flashes of performance, but Latifi rarely strung these together into anything worth more than a place at the back of the grid. He struggled with the tricky behaviour of the Williams and was actually further off Alex Albon than he was old teammate George Russell as a result. Ninth in the wet at Suzuka was his one tangible result, but by then he'd long since convinced Williams to dispense with his services. 19. Mick Schumacher. Schumacher had more big crashes than points finishes in 2022, a year that featured a notable improvement from his rookie campaign, but not by enough. Back-to-back top 10 finishes in the middle of the year suggested he might be kicking on properly in his second year of F1, but he was too inconsistent and still a crash risk, which ultimately meant he failed to convince Haas he should be kept on for a third season. 18. Daniel Ricciardo. After a tough first year with McLaren, things only got harder in 2022. There was nothing like the high of his Italian Grand Prix victory to offset the many difficult weekends, and Ricciardo only finished inside the points in 8 of the 22 Grand Prix held. Ultimately, his struggles are responsible for McLaren failing to beat Alpine to 4th in the Constructors' Championship, while on a personal level, Ricciardo was absolutely demolished by Lando Norris. His off-track conduct was exemplary and he leaves McLaren on good terms, but that's about as positive as Ricciardo's season gets. 17. Zhou Guanyu. Zhou's rookie season was genuinely impressive, despite only scoring 6 points to the 49 of teammate Valtteri Bottas. That wasn't helped by the fact the car was at its best early in the season, when Zhou was still settling in, but he kept the errors to a minimum, worked hard to close the pace gap to Bottas, and proved a popular member of the Alfa Romeo team. And he dispelled doubts about his ability to do a good job at this level. He just didn't have any of the real wow moments to merit anything more than a perfectly respectable placing for a rookie in a lower midfield team. 16. Yuki Tsunoda. At times, Tsunoda was indisputably the quicker AlphaTauri driver, and he took a clear step forward from his up and down rookie season. But even accounting for the team's difficulties this year, his run of 12 mid-season races without a points finish was concerning. Tsunoda's qualifying pace is decent, but by his own admission, he's still working on improving his management of races. So at least he has a clear idea of where he can still make gains and try to realise the potential Red Bull sees in him. 15. Lance Stroll. Stroll produced his usual assortment of incisive first laps, solid drives to decent results, and midfield anonymity during 2022. And although at times he was the equal or better of the two Aston Martin drivers, Sebastian Vettel had the higher peaks. Stroll's 6th place at Suzuka was the high point, but his half-dozen 10th places better characterise his season of solid work. But he continued to lack the cutting edge needed to be more than a middling F1 performer. 14. Kevin Magnussen. Haas got exactly what it would have expected from Kevin Magnussen's unlikely F1 comeback in 2022. His peaks were mega, he scored big points when the car was good enough to, and he grabbed headlines in Brazil with a stunning pole position, his and the team's first in F1. But Magnussen also went missing a few too many times, and even started to struggle to keep Schumacher in check in the second half of the season. 13. Pierre Gasly. At his best on the streets of Monaco, Miami and Baku, or on the sweeps of Spa, Gasly was excellent. But he struggled with an AlphaTauri that had a weak front end and was too often outpaced by his teammate Tsunoda. That meant we saw only flashes of the strengths that made Gasly such a dependable performer for the team over the previous 2.5 seasons. And as the year progressed and Gasly committed his future to Alpine, the peaks became rarer as he struggled to get anything out of the increasingly recalcitrant AlphaTauri. 12. Valtteri Bottas. Bottas spearheaded the Sauber-run Alfa Romeo team's excellent start to 2022, as its focus on the new regulations and a lighter car than most meant that it hit the ground running. In the first 9 races, when the team was at its most competitive, Bottas was in superb form, although the odd mistake did creep in. Thereafter, he struggled to lift the team beyond its natural position as others improved, and he came under more pressure from teammate Zhou through the year. A 10-race pointless streak was ended just in time to save Alfa Romeo's 6th place in the Constructors' Championship, but Bottas needs to toughen up in battle now he's back in F1's midfield. 11. Sebastian Vettel. Vettel's valedictory F1 season wasn't one of relentless crushing performance as in his Red Bull pomp, but even when the Aston Martin was uncompetitive in the first half of the season, the old magic still emerged sporadically. His run to 8th in the rain-affected Imola weekend was the highlight of those difficult times, but his strong 6th place at Suzuka and great qualifying performance in the Abu Dhabi finale showed he still had it to the last. But there were times when he struggled to reach such heights, hence he misses out on a place in our top 10. 10. Alex Albon. Albon had the air of a more confident, certain driver than he had been during the latter stages of his Red Bull stint. He regularly hauled the slowest car on the grid into places it didn't really belong, and his qualifying performances at Spa and Austin were truly outstanding. It wasn't just Albon's obvious peaks in improbable circumstances that impressed, but also the number of times he produced high-quality drives to say 12th or 13th place that few noticed. This was a heartening example of a driver taking a massive career setback in their stride, making good use of the enforced sabbatical, then translating the lessons into a superb comeback. 9. Sergio Perez. Perez had a better year for Red Bull. He won twice and made a good contribution to its Constructors' Championship success, for which he deserves his share of the credit. But he did have a slightly disappointing season in that he didn't manage to finish second in the championship in what turned out to be F1's best car, so he underperformed slightly versus not only what was possible but realistic to achieve. When the car was more front limited early on, he excelled with a superb pole position in Saudi Arabia as well as his Monaco Grand Prix win. But he found it more difficult to extract performance from the quicker but more pointy Red Bull as the season progressed. 8. Esteban Ocon. Ocon became only the second driver to outscore Fernando Alonso as a teammate in F1 history. That was a little misleading, as Alonso was overall the better performer, but that Ocon was close enough to benefit from the vagaries of luck speaks well of him. A sensitive driver with a great feel for the car and who has adopted a methodical way of building pace during F1 weekends, he was generally consistent and rarely far from Alonso's pace even when he was behind. There were a couple of weekends where he got lost, perhaps a victim of his own sensitivity to the car, but overall a season in which he enhanced his reputation. 7. Carlos Sainz. Sainz started the season in all sorts of trouble, as even when he was close to Leclerc's pace, he felt uncomfortable with the car. But often, he was off the pace and he took much of the season to adapt to the unique demands of the Ferrari. There were some major landmarks for Sainz in 2022, a first pole position, that first victory at Silverstone, and over the final part of the season his pace compared very well to Leclerc's. Sainz also showed a real skill for calling the strategic shots that the Ferrari pit wall too often lacked, demonstrating that his fierce intelligence applies very well to the on-track landscape, as well as the technical challenges off it. 6. Fernando Alonso. Alonso suffered pretty appalling luck and unreliability, so his points performance relative to his teammate can be ignored. Time and again he produced dogged, determined race drives even when the results didn't show it. The only downside is that there were times late in the season when he let his frustration with Alpine get the better of him, for instance when he clipped the back of Ocon at Interlagos. In general though, his performance makes a mockery of Alpine questioning whether his age might finally start to get the better of him in the next 12 months. 5. George Russell. Russell had the edge over teammate Hamilton in the early stages of the season, but things became more difficult once Mercedes and its 7-times world champion got into their stride. That led to an extended spell when Russell was generally, by a small margin, the slower Mercedes driver. He wasn't afraid to admit that his performances weren't quite what he demanded of himself during this spell, but he hit back with a strong end to the year that netted his first Grand Prix victory at Interlagos. His pace and off-track contribution convinced Mercedes they have a driver for the long term, and one with a world championship in his future. 4. Lewis Hamilton. Spending the first third of his season trying to improve a flawed car with all sorts of experiments, plus a couple of genuinely below par weekends, made for a poor start for Hamilton. Once Mercedes got into what was described as normal development, heading into the middle stages though, a period followed in which teammate George Russell struggled to find an answer. While Hamilton's season had lower troughs than Russell's, it generally had higher peaks too, even if Russell winning and Hamilton not might suggest otherwise. The points deficit was ultimately deceptive, as Hamilton was very marginally better overall. 3. Charles Leclerc. Leclerc's pole-to-win ratio became increasingly absurd in 2022, a testament to his incredible one-lap pace and Ferrari's sketchiness on Sundays. His ready commitment to a ballsy move, like around the outside of Hamilton at Copse on old tyres, is part of his toolbox, but he can race smartly too, as his dices with Verstappen in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia showcased. There are rough edges still, evidenced by costly mistakes at Imola and Paul Ricard, and to make the final step, Leclerc needs to be more ruthless as he seems passive compared to SAINZ in crucial situations. 2. Lando Norris. Norris had few halo results in 2022, with his sole podium finish coming at Imola, but he produced a string of high quality performances hidden in the midfield, driving a car that he found unpredictable and inconsistent. If there was a driver who was going to produce a brilliant drive to 7th place, it was going to be Norris. He demolished Ricciardo by an even bigger margin than he did in 2021 and left the McLaren team increasingly convinced they have a genuine superstar on their hands. His off-track skills are also underrated, while his work to adapt his driving style to the demands of the car played a key role in his McLaren supremacy. 1. Max Verstappen. Verstappen showed in 2022 that he could ruthlessly crush the opposition with relentless performance during a championship campaign that was very different to his last gasp triumph in 2021. There were some in-race errors, plus the clash with Hamilton at Interlagos, so his year wasn't without the odd blemish, but nobody ever posts a perfect season. Verstappen outraced a faster package in some of the early Grand Prix and blew everybody away with precious few exceptions when Red Bull's car morphed into F1's best. His peaks, think Montreal qualifying, charging through the field in Budapest and Spa, plus that crushing wet victory at Suzuka, were staggeringly good. Perhaps the scariest thing for Verstappen's rivals is that even after a record-breaking year, there is still room for improvement. That's our ranking, but what about yours? Let us know in the comments what we got wrong and what you'd have done differently. If you liked our video, please leave us with a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and turn on the notifications bell to be notified of all our future videos.